Welcome to the podcast about venture capital, where investors and founders alike can learn how VCs make decisions and reach conviction. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Welcome to another special release of Investor Stories. On this installment, the experts discuss a startup that they did not invest in, why they passed, and if there was a key learning that now informs their approach. Here's the segment called Why I Passed. On today's special segment, we have Sunil Nagaraj of Ubiquity Ventures. Sunil, can you tell us a story about a good or a bad pass, a story about a startup that you passed on?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Nick. There have been a ton of good passes in my career, but one that was relatively recent was passing on investing in Tonal. I think of Tonal as a software beyond the screen company. There's different ways to describe it, but Tonal turns your gym into software. It turns the idea of lifting weights like barbells or dumbbells into a software problem. Now, how the hell do you turn, dumbbells into software? Well, you use an electric motor with variable resistance to create tension on the fly so that you can have, really good strength training. So this was I would say in many ways, perfect Ubiquity investment, right on roadmap, that it was software beyond the screen. And I met the company fairly early. One of my extended team members, this group of 50 technical nerds that are affiliated with Ubiquity, folks I've known for 10 years. One of my extended team members was pretty senior at Tonal. It was a 10-person company. And met with the founder, Ali, who was fantastic, visionary, on top of it. I liked the idea behind the product, but it probably passed at the time because it felt heavy and I wasn't sure about consumer behavior. The idea of installing a big screen, like a 40-inch LCD screen with weight bars, having to drill it into studs in your wall, professionally installed. This was 2019, I think. And I passed on investing. And I think it was a terrible idea. Partially, I should have, trusted in them to figure things out. But then COVID hit. And the notion of having in-home workout equipment, Peloton and others exploded in popularity. So missed on that one. My guess is it would be like 100x, already from where I could have invested, which is really a bummer.
On today's special segment, we have Brian O'Malley of Forerunner. Brian, can you tell us a story about a good or a bad pass, a story about a startup that you passed on?
Well, I will say this first. I do believe there are good reasons to pass on companies, even if that company ends up being successful. We had one company, this is back when I was at Battery. I'll never forget it because everything checked out except for the founder himself. The market was great. People loved the product. There was a clear need, but we did reference checks on the founder and they just came back really negative. And so it was one of these awkward conversations where I just didn't feel comfortable making something up. And I just said, hey, I don't know what happened, but like a lot of people you work with are not a big fan of yours. And, that company ended up going public and doing very well for their investors. But the previous company they sold ended up getting sued for like $2 billion. And so it's just one of these things where everything checked out and the diligence suggested we should pass and we passed and I'm okay with that. There are other times where we've passed on things where, process or ego gets in the way. I remember, we were looking at DoorDash at Excel, and there were all sorts of reasons to pass on. It was a nascent business at the time. Postmates was larger. The growth team, was big fans of Postmates, but we ultimately couldn't hit the ownership threshold or the dollar amount we were looking for. But it was a relatively small difference. And that was the reason why we passed as a group. It wasn't because we didn't believe there was a market. It wasn't because we didn't think that Tony was a really special individual. And that's happened for both successful companies as well as companies that don't work out. And when the process gets ahead of the ultimate goal of the fact that venture math is a little bit fuzzier, you need to kind of squint at what you're looking at. That happened previously when I was at Battery. There was a company that we wanted to invest in at a $23 million valuation. We could get it to 25. And this is some of the reason why there's been so much inflation in pricing, because people look back at those mistakes and realize, hey, that $2 million difference didn't really matter. And then it compounds where each deal gets a little bit more aggressive over time. But the times where the process has gotten in the way, those are the ones that hurt, because you ultimately were in the right spot. And, for one reason or another, didn't get there.
On today's special segment, we have Annie Kadavy, Managing Director at Redpoint Ventures. Annie, can you tell us a story about a good or a bad pass, a story about a startup that you passed on?
Yes, I've got plenty of examples of both of those. And, the hard part about this job is you just don't really know which bucket they're going to fall into for many years. So Early on in venture, I kept an Excel doc. It wasn't a spreadsheet. I was, I guess, more old school, but I kept an Excel doc of every single company I saw, whether by myself or with other people on the team. And I had this idea that it was in my mind, I had built Airtable 10 years before it existed, but it was like, oh, this is going to be this great CRM that's going to keep me up to date on everything. And I'm going to keep really, stay really organized. At the end of the day, the only column I kept was what was my gut reaction to it based on what I knew.
Wow.
And after about 2 years of investing, that data started to really help me a lot. It showed me the things that I had seen. And more importantly, it showed me the things that I had totally missed. And then of those things that I had totally missed, are they things that I could course correct on? Or are they things that just out of left field, something happened, like a global pandemic, for example. And I didn't expect that. It wasn't on my list of topics. So if I think through that lens, I can talk about a couple of specific companies that's helpful. One that I passed on and had the opportunity clear as day in front of me was Robinhood at the seed. I went to college with Vlad and several of the founders. They are wonderful, exceptional humans. And I knew that. And I wrote a note to my team at the time and said, these are wonderful, exceptional humans. They are some of the smartest people I know. I have no understanding of what they're building. I don't get it. And that was, me being wrong. I should have just placed the bet on the people because I had a perspective on the people and I didn't do the work or didn't know enough to place a bet on the market. So that's a good example there. On the flip side, there was a company called Teespring that comes to mind where I really liked the business and I really liked the founders. That company ended up not working out, but for a while it was a high flyer coming out of YC. This is probably 14 or 15. We ended up passing on it. Ended up probably being, definitely being the right financial decision. I think the learning there, also coming back to our earlier conversation around marketplaces, was how the supply side of that market evolved over time. At the very beginning, it was truly a democratized set of users where they had all these really incredible stories of people that were creating t-shirts and then selling them to everybody on Facebook. And it was this decentralized department store. And I was like, that is cool. That is compelling. And then sure enough, you found people that could arbitrage that and they just sucked up all of it. And the supply side ended up really consolidating. And obviously Facebook, changed some of their rules about how to do it. And so it ended up being a more challenged business than it looked like at the very beginning.
Interesting. Yeah, I tell my team, when we see a big Series A come out for a startup we pass on, the story's not over yet. Series A is not the end of the journey. At some point, we all just kind of have to trust the thesis and trust what you're doing and stick with it. 10 years later, we'll know.
Yeah, totally. If we're lucky.
That will conclude this installment of Investor Stories. If you're enjoying the program and would like to see it continue, take a moment and leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Okay, that will wrap things up for today. Until next time, over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks for joining me.